Sometimes a name comes along that simply doesn't fit the usual trade rumor mill because he's too talented, too young, too much of a genuine former #1 pick to actually be realistically in play. And yet tonight on the show, I have to tell you about exactly that kind of situation because we are talking about a two-time All-Star, a former #1 overall pick, still only 25 years old, and a team that makes real sense as a suitor is the Los Angeles Lakers. So stay with me, Lakers fans, because the idea of pairing this kind of explosive downhill force with Luka Doncic is exactly the kind of move that gives the Lakers a genuine long-term championship partnership. Here's exactly what's being reported, cutting right through the noise. According to sources, New Orleans' new head of basketball operations, Joe Dumars, has publicly said the team has no plans to trade Zion Williamson, but people close to the situation describe a front office that isn't completely married to him either, and would be willing to listen if the right blockbuster package landed on the table. With real fit questions already surfacing between Zion and the team's young center, and a new front office looking to put its own stamp on the roster, this situation is genuinely more fluid than it appears on the surface. Zion Williamson, in the purple and gold, lined up right next to Luka Doncic. Read that line again slowly, because if you truly understand just how rare this level of physical dominance really is, and you understand exactly what Luka Doncic needs around him for the long haul, you understand precisely why this could be one of the most electrifying moves of the entire offseason, and I am here to walk you through step by step exactly why a player this talented might genuinely be in play, because it's a fascinating situation developing in real time. Now, I already know exactly what some of you are going to bring up, the health history, the price, and whether two ball-dominant offensive players can coexist, and we are going to get to every single bit of it, I promise, because I always give you the honest version, but stay with me through this one, because pairing a physically overwhelming, still young, former #1 pick with Luka in his prime is exactly the kind of move that builds a championship core that lasts. Let me start with why Zion Williamson is even in this conversation, because it's a fascinating situation. The Zion Williamson era in New Orleans has simply not gone as the franchise hoped. Since he was drafted, the Pelicans have had losing records in 5 of his 7 seasons, making the playoffs just twice, and losing in the first round both times. New Orleans just hired Joe Dumars as their new head of basketball operations, and Dumars has already fired the head coach, hired a new one in Jamal Mosley, and made it clear he intends to put his own stamp on this roster. While Joe Dumars has publicly said the team has absolutely no plans to move Zion Williamson right now, sources close to the situation have described a front office that is genuinely not married to him either, willing to listen if the right package, especially one built around a star of real, genuine significance, comes together. There are also real, legitimate questions about roster fit, since lineups pairing Zion with the team's young center have actually been outscored quite significantly this past season, forcing the coaching staff to limit their shared minutes together down the stretch. That right there is the crack in the door, and it is genuinely open, and let me underline just how real this new era of player movement is, because it's the whole foundation here. Think about what we have already witnessed in this offseason alone. A 2-time MVP was traded in one of the biggest blockbusters in recent NBA history. A star all-pro wide receiver over in the NFL was dealt to a new home. Across the league, the franchise cornerstones everyone assumed could never move have changed teams one after another. The old certainties are simply dead. And in Zion Williamson's specific case, you have a former #1 pick on a new front office's radar, real fit questions with the roster already forming around him, and reporting suggesting his name would genuinely be in play if the right blockbuster presented itself. The door is open, the situation is genuinely fluid, and the only question is which contender is bold enough to make the call. So now let me tell you exactly who Zion Williamson is, in case anyone needs the reminder, because this is the part that should get you right up and out of your seat. Zion Williamson is one of the most singularly explosive, physically overwhelming forwards the sport has ever produced. He was the #1 overall pick, a National Player of the Year out of Duke, and a player many scouts called a can't-miss generational talent the moment he stepped on an NBA floor. He's a genuine two-time All-Star, a 285-pound force of nature who plays above the rim with a combination of speed and power that genuinely has no real comparison anywhere else in the entire league. He's averaged well over 23 points a game across his entire career, shooting at a genuinely elite efficiency, the kind of downhill scorer who simply cannot be stopped one-on-one once he gets a full head of steam going. And this past season, he finally delivered the exact kind of health and availability that silenced a lot of his doubters around the league, playing in 62 games, the second most of his entire career, while averaging 21 points, 5.7 rebounds, and 3.2 assists on an efficient 60% shooting from the field. Acquiring a player like this isn't just adding a piece. It's adding a former #1 pick with genuine top-tier superstar upside, still only 25 years old. And let me put his resume in proper context, because it tells you why this is such a fascinating story. A former #1 overall pick, a two-time All-Star, a player whose per-minute impact, when healthy, ranks among the most dominant interior forces in the entire league. He is still just 25 years old, which means whichever team lands him isn't just getting a talented player, they're getting a player who should be entering the absolute prime years of his career. Players with this specific blend of youth, physical dominance, and all-star pedigree essentially never become realistic trade targets unless something has genuinely shifted inside the organization that drafted them. That's exactly why his situation in New Orleans has become one of the most closely watched stories of the entire summer. So now let's talk about why this fits Luka Doncic so perfectly, because this is the heart of it. But first, let me make sure you really appreciate how rare a player like this actually is, because it's the whole point of the story. In today's NBA, the hardest thing in the world to find is a player who combines this level of physical dominance with this level of skill. A player defenses simply cannot contain one-on-one no matter how they scheme against him. Most players need either elite size or elite speed, not both at this extreme. Zion Williamson has both, at a level that has drawn comparisons to the most physically unique players the sport has ever produced. Think about how few 25-year-old former #1 picks with multiple all-star selections and this level of downhill force are even theoretically available on the trade market at any given time. You can count them on one hand across the entire league, so the mere fact that his situation has grown genuinely uncertain is the entire reason this story matters so much. Here's the thing about building around Luka Doncic. He is one of the greatest offensive engines the entire game has ever seen, and the single best way to maximize him is by surrounding him with a player who can finish above the rim off his passing without needing the ball in his own hands very often. Zion Williamson is exactly that kind of elite finisher, a downhill force who can catch Luka's lobs and pocket passes and finish hard through contact that would stop most other players completely cold. Just imagine for a second Luka Doncic orchestrating the entire offense from the perimeter, while Zion Williamson rolls hard to the rim on every possession, drawing help defenders and opening up even more space for Luka's shooters spotted up around the arc. That exact combination, a truly generational offensive engine paired with one of the single most physically dominant finishers anywhere in the entire league, is exactly the kind of pairing that turns a good offense into a genuinely unstoppable one, and Zion's youth means he could realistically be part of the Lakers' core for the entire length of Luka's prime as well. So now let's talk about how this would actually work in practice, because the price is the key. Zion Williamson is owed a significant salary, and to actually trade for him, the Lakers would have to put together a real, genuinely competitive package, likely including real draft capital and possibly young talent on top, since New Orleans has signaled that a significant enough return could get them to genuinely listen. It would be a major, genuinely complicated trade to construct, no question about it. But the Lakers have always been a franchise more than willing to make the bold, blockbuster move when a player of this caliber and this level of youth is on the table. And pairing a physically dominant young forward with Luka Doncic in his prime is exactly the kind of swing this franchise exists to make. And let me put the stakes in proper context, because it matters here. Luka Doncic is one of the greatest offensive talents this league has ever seen, but a generational engine like that reaches its true ceiling only when the players around him make his gravity and passing count for something every single possession. Zion Williamson at his physical peak is exactly the kind of finisher who turns every single one of Luka's passes into a genuine advantage, the rare partner who doesn't need to dominate the ball to be a superstar level weapon. That's not a hypothetical fit, it's a very specific, well-understood basketball marriage between a genius passer and an elite downhill finisher. But I told you I'd be honest with you, so let's take the doubts head on because on this one they are real. The first objection is the health history. Zion Williamson has genuinely battled hamstring and back injuries throughout his entire career, and betting real significant assets on his long-term availability going forward is a genuine, honest risk. That's a fair, genuinely real concern to have. But he's still only 25 years old, and a completely fresh front office and medical staff could potentially manage his workload very differently than New Orleans ever did. The second objection is the cost, since a real package would mean surrendering significant draft capital and possibly young talent from a roster still being built around Luka. Fair, but for a generational talent like Luka in his prime, you have to be willing to push your chips in to build a championship core, and a young, physically dominant finisher is exactly the kind of player worth pushing in for. The third objection is the fit, since both Luka and Zion have historically needed the ball in their hands to be effective. Fair question, but Zion's game, when at its best, thrives off cuts, rolls, and transition opportunities rather than isolation possessions, which actually complements a primary ball handler like Luka better than people assume at first glance. Let me also address the fit question one more time, because it's the one people bring up first. Two players who have both historically needed the ball can absolutely coexist, and recent history across the league proves it works when the roles are clearly defined. Luka handles the ball, reads the defense, and delivers it. Zion catches, finishes, and clears out space. That's not two stars competing for the same touches. That's two stars occupying two entirely different roles on the same possession. And when it's set up correctly by a good coaching staff, that kind of split has produced championship level offenses before. So let me tell you where my head is at, and then I've got one final thought that I think is the real key to all of this. If the Lakers pull this off, they give Luka Doncic a physically dominant downhill finisher who can be his partner for years, and they do it by pouncing on a rare opportunity to land a former #1 pick still in his mid-20s. Just picture it for a second. Luka Doncic running the entire offense, Zion Williamson finishing above the rim off his passing on nearly every possession, a Lakers team suddenly impossible for any defense to load up against because the threats come from two completely different directions. Whether it actually works comes down to the cost and assets and the health holding up, and that's the real honest debate here. But the fit with Luka is fascinating. The ceiling is a genuine championship, and the Lakers have never been shy about chasing exactly this kind of bold, star-pairing swing. And here's the thought I want to leave you with, the part almost nobody is connecting. A young, genuinely physically dominant former #1 pick becoming even loosely available is one of the single rarest opportunities in all of basketball. New Orleans hasn't said publicly they're moving him, and that's the honest, straightforward reality of the situation, but a brand new front office genuinely open to listening, combined with real questions about roster fit already surfacing, is exactly the kind of situation that eventually produces a real trade. And the Lakers, with a superstar in Luka Doncic who needs exactly this kind of physical finisher, are perhaps the single most logical destination of all. So let me boil it all the way down for you because I want this crystal clear. A generational offensive engine in Luka Doncic who needs a physically dominant finisher he can grow with for years. A former #1 overall pick and two-time All-Star in Zion Williamson, still only 25, with a new front office in New Orleans that isn't fully married to him. The honest obstacles are the cost and assets and the very real injury history. But the fit with Luka is fascinating, the long-term ceiling is enormous, and the Lakers of all franchises exist to make exactly this kind of bold star-pairing swing. So let me boil it all the way down for you one more time, because I want this crystal clear. A generational offensive engine in Luka Doncic who needs a physically dominant downhill finisher he can genuinely grow with for years. A former #1 overall pick and two-time All-Star in Zion Williamson, still only 25 years old, with a new front office in New Orleans that has said publicly there are no plans to move him, but isn't fully closed off either. The honest obstacles are the real cost in draft capital and young talent and the very real injury history that comes with him. But the fit with Luka is genuinely fascinating. The long-term ceiling is enormous, and the Lakers, of all franchises, exist to make exactly this kind of bold, star-pairing swing. I'm not telling you it's signed. I have no reporting that says the ink is dry, and I am never going to make something up for you because the only reason you keep coming back to me is that I shoot you straight, even when the honest version is that Dumars has publicly said New Orleans has no plans to trade him. That's true, and this is more about a fluid situation worth watching than a deal already in motion. But I am telling you, the talent is genuine, the fit with Luka is fascinating, and a former #1 pick still in his mid-20s is one of the rarest assets there is. You stack all of that up, the fit and the long-term ceiling and the fact that the front office isn't fully closed off to moving him, and you can feel it, can't you? This one would just make sense.